All right, we got the AU Undercover band, Wayne and Garth and Jeeves in the garage. Rob Browne here with you. Kevin Scarbinski, Doug Dean, executive producer Brendan Martin. Ronnie Sanders coming out of sick pay. What's the magic number of wins going to satisfy the Auburn fan base? As Doug said, Auburn fans have had to learn to enjoy their championships in dog years, like to close that gap. And we'll shed a little bit of light on the Butch Thompson coached Auburn Tigers baseball. Softball is over. Women lost in the tournament. They'll probably still be in the tournament. But it's a great question, and I'm just going to throw it out there. And by the way, Kevin, on your podcast, Scarbo Knows, on this very channel, on our YouTube channel, you laid out a hell of a case last week. Overall records, 2020 to 2024, these last 5 years. We all know it's been the roughest stretch for Auburn since the late 40s and 1950. My dad was there in 1950. He said, boy, I was there. We lost to Wofford. Wofford, the Terriers from Spartanburg. And he said, Gordon Person was sworn in as the governor in Montgomery, and they had a big party. And the first thing he did was quickly remove Earl Browne, who was a nice man, a gentleman, my dad said, a Notre Dame man, as the head football coach at Auburn. They brought Shug Jordan back, and he had a great 25-year run. But that record for Auburn in the last 5 years, Kevin, you pointed out, 14th in the SEC at 29 and 33. So let's get started. How does Auburn dig out of this? Looks like they're well on their way with 2 top 10 recruiting classes.
Well, that's, let's just lay out those numbers first, Rob. It's actually one game worse. It's 28 and 33. Going back to 2020.
Have you no mercy?
Last year.
Yes, have you no mercy?
My facts don't care about your feelings. I couldn't resist, Doug. Sorry.
No, it's cool. Once your head is bleeding badly.
Facts are facts, right?
Yes.
They're the only schools of the current 16 that are in the SEC, and obviously asterisk, Texas and Oklahoma have not been in the SEC for the last 5 years. But overall, counting all 16 schools, Auburn is in 14th place. First of all, they're one of only 4 schools that have a losing overall record in that time. Arkansas is 1 spot better, but they're 30 and 31. And the 2 schools that are worse than Auburn, Mississippi State and Vandy. State is 27 and 34 overall, and Vandy is 16 and 42. And then if you want to add insult to injury, Auburn is the only one of the current 16 SEC schools that does not have a single 7-win season since 2020.
Ugh.
So that's kind of the, if this isn't bottom, I don't know what it is.
I am that optimist who, when hurled out of the 12th floor, gets down to the 5th floor and says, so far, so good. So you could, from what Kevin has shared, by definition, things will improve in 2025. And if they don't, then lightning really can strike 5 or 6 times in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, those numbers, 28. Auburn, I'm going to say this, the canary in the coal mine that Auburn's in trouble is, since 1933, and Auburn had only played South Carolina a few times, but prior to 2020 and 2021, Auburn's record against South Carolina was 10-1-1. You had to go back to 1933 for the last loss. 2 of them now, 2020 and 2021. Auburn last year was all giddy Tuesday and Wednesday after a win over Kentucky, a team they haven't lost to in Lexington since 1966, and Vanderbilt. Auburn had never, ever lost to Vanderbilt in history in Auburn. They don't play them a lot. Ole Miss never lost back-to-back. So those are canaries in the coal mine. Nothing against those programs, but you have to look at Auburn as one of the big 6. Since 1963, only 6 schools have won the SEC, and those other schools have tried, but they haven't done it.
And yet you've got Andy Staples. These are credible guys. Andy Staples, in his way too early poll forecast, has Auburn 13th. That's pretty sporty. and maybe a little rosy. And Joel Klatt, who's also credible analyst, Fox Sports commentator and color analyst, has Auburn 22nd in his early poll. So I think it was on Locked on Auburn, those guys commented that it is possible, looking at these early preseason top 25 polls, none of them are official right now, but it's possible in September between Baylor, who could be ranked, Baylor, and I believe it would be possible to be Texas A&M. Auburn has a chance if they can get to 5-0. I'm not saying they can. I'm worried about that opening Baylor game on a Friday night. But Auburn could be looking back at September saying, we beat 2 ranked teams in the month of September. So somebody believes, looking at the recruiting Hugh's done and that, the depth and this fact that it's year 3, Auburn's too good a program historically to stay that bad for a third year, I guess, is part of the logic along with the talent acquisition.
Well, and if you look at the Harsin years before that, I mean, it has been as Kevin pointed out, it's been a hell of a drought. It should be, we talked about what's a magic number. I mean, I think fans would be happy with 9. Is that too rosy an outlook? I don't know.
Vegas is 7.5. So,
well, Kevin, looking at Auburn, the losses in the last 2 years, I've gone back and charted this thing like I'm looking at a stock index. The 2 years, so many, and Doug, you pointed it out in the dose, losses 10 points or less. Auburn's not winning those close games, and I think you can put the blame on poor offensive line play and sub-average quarterback play. And if you upgrade your quarterback play 40%, 9 or 10 wins is what I'm looking for this year.
And that's the encouraging thing.
Yeah.
You can go back to the 21 Iron Bowl. You talk about how many coulda, woulda, shoulda games has Auburn played in the last several years, especially the last 2 years under Hugh Freeze and company at the 2023 Iron Bowl. Never should have lost that game. Oklahoma last year, Cal last year, Arkansas. We could go. I mean, how many games have they been right there? Now, if you are looking at trends, and I've shared this before, it's an old coaching cliche that as you're building a program and you're taking over a program that's really, really down, as Hugh Freeze did, the first thing you do is you lose big. You just don't have the talent. Then you start to close that gap, and then you start to play competitive games, but you're losing close games now. Well, the next step in that progression is to win those close games. So that's, I think, what people are going to be looking for this season, more so than a number. Look, the bottom line is you got to win more than you lose.
Yeah.
Auburn hasn't done that since 2020. So you got to end the losing streak, first of all. But get in those games, be competitive, and then make the plays that win those games. And that starts at the quarterback position, where they have not performed on a winning basis, on a regular basis. And that's really, if you want to, and offensive line is a big part of that, obviously. But that's where it starts. And that's why Jackson Arnold and whatever role that Deuce Knight plays, they've got to make winning plays at winning time to make the difference in those games.
Do you see Deuce Knight? Who do you see being the starting quarterback at the end of the year?
End of the year. That's a good question.
That's a
weighted question.
That's a wicked old Greg Olson curveball right there.
It's an easy question if you ask about Baylor game.
Well, it should be. Look, I would suggest that it would be best for Auburn if it's Jackson Arnold. And Deuce Knight is able to play a role not necessarily as a savior or a guy they have to turn to because Jackson Arnold is struggling, but a guy who has a specific set of responsibilities, a specific package. And we've talked about this before. Tim Tebow, and again, please, I'm not comparing him to Tim Tebow. There was only one of those. Yeah. But that Chris Leak, Tim Tebow combination at Florida when they won the national championship under Urban Meyer, that was really, really well thought out, well executed. They took advantage of each guy's strengths. Chris Leak was a drop back passer. Tim Tebow was a battering ram at that time who hadn't really developed as a passer. So they took advantage of their strengths, and it worked very, very well. And Tim Tebow was such a team guy. He was unselfish. He was happy to play that role. If Deuce Knight can find a niche like that, it just makes the offense more dangerous. And if Jackson Arnold does what people thought Jackson Arnold would do coming out of high school, then you've got something.
You know, you talk about a package. You know, Terry did that. You know, we did that with Damian Craig and Patrick Nix. You know, you can do those things and make it work. But you've got to, as you said, you've got to be creative, and you've got to have a plan for doing that. Otherwise, you end up with a locker room issue.
Please let it look better than. I mean, I get nauseous reactions thinking back to it. Let it look better for Hugh Freeze than bringing Robbie Ashford in inexplicably at weird times. That was at his first year. So I'm not normally a fan of that. Kevin, I was going to add I guess it would be a third or fourth phase to what you first talked about. Programs like Georgia and Alabama in recent years, you can add Texas if you want, add whomever. They get to the point where they're so dominant. They've got depth and power and great scoring capacity, great defense in the trenches. They're tough to deal with, but they get usually 6 or 7 games that are not even going to be close. What's my point in saying that? Well, you take those out of the risk category, but when you're in Auburn last year and you get yourself, and it's self-inflicted from Harsin to, you know, some mistakes Freeze made, arguably, but if you play in 5 or 6 close games, you're playing with fire, and you're going to have a losing season unless everything goes well for you. But the great nerd, or everybody's favorite nerd, Bill Connolly, talks about in an article I would really direct everyone to. It's well worth your time. Put a plastic pocket protector in before you pull that up to read. But he said that Auburn was arguably one of the unluckiest teams in 2024. And for that reason, he thinks Auburn has the potential, nobody's saying guarantees, but the potential to be one of the big turnaround stories in 2025. Specifically, for example, he said Auburn was a very unlucky 1-5 in games decided by 10 points or less.
There you go.
And so you usually in those close games, teams you get a big enough sample size, it's about 50-50 how it breaks down. So, you know, Auburn needs luck to go its way, but you make your own luck.
Well, I think Auburn, too, if you look at Jackson Arnold, when he came out of high school out of Denton, Texas, in the Metroplex out there, he was the number 4 rated quarterback in the country, number 10 overall player. When Oklahoma signed him, they said he was the highest rated offensive recruit signed in school history. That's a pretty damn strong statement to say. Deuce Knight, depends on, you know, when he signed with Auburn, he lost a star, but he's a 5-star player. Okay. These recruiting rankings are such a joke. A lot of them are, but this guy is out of George County, you know, Lucedale, Mississippi. That's the old way to Destin. Auburn tried to get, remember McKinley Jackson, big defensive tackle a couple of years ago, went to A&M. I don't think it's a big deal considering how close Auburn's been in these games the last few years for the Tigers to jump into double-digit wins this year. I won't be shocked at all. And Doug, you pointed out, and y'all know this.
Hold on, regular season?
Yeah, regular season.
Like 10-2?
I
think
do.
that's a little
That's
rosy.
minimum 10-2, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's a little rosy. It's not impossible. We'll know early October.
Yeah.
They need to be 5-1 coming out of the Georgia game and going into the Mizzou week.
I like the fact that, and AU Undercover, Ronnie, y'all just crush it with these stats, your research. You broke the 10 position groups down last week. And by experience, the offensive line had 82 combined starts. When Auburn walked off the field against Oregon, I'll never forget Lee Zimba, Ryan Pugh, Mike Big Snacks Berry, 176 combined starts. Now, the other 9 position groups combined for Auburn have 88 total starts. But when you've got talent like a Keldrick Falk at a Highland Home, who was a 5 until he signed with Auburn, and he was a 4. But, I mean, he's a 5. He's 6'6", 285, and we've all stood next to him at media days after a game, whatever. God, he looks like he weighs 215. he's a top 10 draft pick. I think Auburn is going to be maybe the biggest shocker. And I'm more critical of Auburn than I am of any school because it's my school. I'm not going to be shocked if they get to 10 because I think the offensive line, and you pointed it out the other day, Doug, Xavier Chapman from Virginia Tech, Mason Murphy from Southern Cal out of San Juan Capistrano. I'm going to ask him if I ever talked to him. Have you ever seen the Swallows when they come back in the spring? I'm sure he's.
Yeah, if you want to, here's some Toomer's lemonade for any good Auburn fan that's listening. Kool-Aid, if you will, Toomer's Kool-Aid.
There you go.
But this is data. This is not, all of us as fans, you sit around and you talk yourself into a couple of more wins than the data really supports. That's what the nature of being a fan. And as for Vegas saying the over-under 7.5 for Auburn, probably about right for the betting public. But I just want to vomit on that kind of lukewarm forecast. I've got 9 wins. I feel like that's aggressive, Rob, and you're normally your feet on the ground, a little more risk averse and conservative picking seasons. But here's a data point. Auburn was not finishing drives last year in SEC games. Only scored 19, and in this day and age, we're not in 1970 or 80 in the 80s, a die and that those 3 yards in a cloud of dust years that Scarbo got to write about a lot. 19 points is like 7 points 20 years ago, and so what was happening in the red zone, Peyton Thorne, who was okay at times last year, and if you just looked at his numbers, you would call him average, I guess. But if you drill down to red zone ratings, Peyton Thorne completed only 53% of his red zone passes for, get this, an average of 3.9 yards per attempt and an anemic QB rating of 159 in the red zone. Now, if you want to get excited, and we have to let him play, see him play with the bullets flying, Jackson Arnold, who is going to be your starter, there is no damn way Hugh Freeze is putting a true freshman under center at Baylor on a Friday night, unless there's injuries or something weird's going on. I do think, the ideal, I agree with Kevin, is if Arnold has a great year enough to get in the draft, and then next year it opens the door for Deuce Knight, 1 year of maturity to come in, and you get a good two or 3 year runway from him. But Jackson Arnold, same red zone stats last year, even with the myriad issues that plagued Oklahoma last year, he completed 65% of his passes in the red zone, average of 6.09 yards per attempt, and he had a whopping QB rating of 289 in the red zone. That QB rating ranked Arnold number 9 among qualified FBS quarterbacks last season. So and then you add special teams. If Auburn can not be abysmal on special teams, which they were last year, and then they can get Alex McPherson back, who's hopefully he stays healthy, got a new Aussie punter that people are excited about. But if red zone finishing, passing, a coherent passing attack, which we should have with this wide receiver group, then to me, the X factor becomes almost all about the offensive line. Can they take the next big step? I know this, Rob. There is no way we will be worse than Percy Lewis at left tackle. The question is, can we be dramatically better or just serviceable? But I like the kid they brought in from Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I'm really curious to see how Hugh Freeze and the offensive staff develop as play callers, because we can point at Peyton Thorne making bad decisions on RPOs, but really you should point to the sideline and say, why are you giving him the opportunity to make a run pass option decision?
Yes.
In short yardage. How many times were they in short yardage last year, especially, at the goal line? And you had Jarquez Hunter, who may have been the most underutilized quality back in the country, especially in short yardage situations and goal to go situations. That's, we know you likes the passing game. I mean, he's demonstrated that. They're going to have weapons at wide receiver. but you can't go away from the ability to pound out a 3rd and 1, a 2nd and 2 at the 5, and you're running an RPO. No. Your offensive line should be good enough, and your back should be good enough to get those 2 yards, those 3 yards you need in those situations, so you don't put yourself in harm's way of having the quarterback put the ball on the ground, throw it to the wrong team, throw it into the stands, whatever it might be. And, if you could probably take, and it would be an interesting study. Somebody may have done this. I don't know. If you took probably 24 plays, maybe even less than that in Auburn's season last year, offensive plays in those kind of situations, and instead of coming up short, forcing a kick, turning the ball over, you convert the first down or you score the touchdown, don't have to settle for a field goal, which you weren't guaranteed to make last year, obviously, another issue with the offense that should be improved. And you flip them, what is the record then? And those are the plays they've got to make. And that starts with the play calls from the sideline.
Kevin, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to say, Kevin, you make a great point. I talked to I don't have permission to use his name, but I talked to a pretty prominent former SEC head coach last week, and he said 2 things that were really interesting. He said, Freeze will get it right. He said, he'll get it fixed. He said, now some of the things he says in the press about his coaches, make you scratch your head. He said, but he'll get it right. He said, he can't help himself. He wants to throw the ball, and that's what he likes to do. And he said, his words were, he just can't help himself. And so he said, I would have handed it to Jarquez Hunter a lot more. He chose not to, and they probably win more games if they do. But
I wrote about this yesterday, guys. We are, without even pre-planning it, all 4 of us are on very similar track. When I'm rosy saying I think this team has it in them to find a way to get to 9 wins. Let me tell you how big a bet that is. As loaded as Ole Miss was last year, they only got to 9 wins. Alabama, stacked with talent, granted coaching disruption change to DeBoer, they only got to 9 wins. And they had one of the games was an ugly loss at Oklahoma. So to call Auburn getting to 9 wins is aggressive. But I will say this, my worry, if they don't get there, what I wrote about, and y'all are saying essentially the same thing. The way I put it was, does Hugh Freeze have it in his psychology to know the moment, and there'll be a couple of these this year, they're almost every year, where the pathway to winning the damn game is to win it ugly. And there's really no such thing as an ugly win. But I think what people get mad when you say this, but I'm convinced. I think there were a couple of games that Freeze was airing it out, and in part to put on tape for Deuce Knight and some of these wide receivers he was recruiting. Yeah, we're going to really throw the ball if you come here. And if he had 4 or 5 games where it's a 60-40 run pass ratio, I think that hurts him. So you end up losing games. And he's gotten away in recruiting. He's gotten away with making that mistake. But I think that ends this year. He's got to know the moment in those games where if you're playing Georgia and you get it to the 4th quarter, it may be that they've got an edge rusher you're not dealing with. You cannot ask your quarterback to throw slow developing passes when you have a chance to win the game. And your chance is to grind the ball, live with getting 3.5 yards a carry if you're good enough to do it, and maybe throw some safe play action. But I'll be watching with interest. Can Freeze take the next step, as Kevin said, as a play caller, to call an ugly game with the goal being, we're going to look ugly, but we're going to win.
Okay, here's the point I'm going to make. Y'all, a little bit of trivia. The top 20 college football programs with the most active NFL players on NFL rosters, as rough as this patch of 5 years has been, and Auburn is in a slump. Auburn's still tied for 14th with Florida with 36 players on active NFL rosters. And that's amazing.
Once they get there, they make a team.
Yeah, that's right. So next question. And Jamie and Sherwood. I mean, that's my son Wilson's friend who played at Auburn from Jensen Beach, Florida. Just signed a $42 million three-year deal with the Jets. And there's never going to be a lack of players at Auburn. But I'm going to throw this one. If you look at Auburn and it's the schemes, and like you, Ronnie, I've had coaches and we all talk to coaches, OTR, but they've said, talent, yeah, it's gotten better. It was god awful when Freeze took over. It was the worst roster I've ever seen. But he said, you change those schemes up, a little subtle change here and there, and then you start getting some big old, beasts out there on the tackle positions, everything. And Connor Lew, let's not rule. This guy from Kennesaw, Georgia, is the best center that Auburn's had in a long time. I'm not saying that, he's the greatest ever, but he's one of them. And so that offensive line starts coming together. But here's the question. Tight end. Everybody says, we're going to use the tight end. Like Brendan said on the show yesterday, these edge rushers in the SEC just eat them up. So, and maybe Freeze along the time, was he playing to show Deuce Knight what Auburn would do? Was Freeze playing last year to those receivers, those 4 freshmen especially, to keep them from hitting the portal, and didn't develop the running game until late? And when, Jarquez Hunter had a big day against Kentucky, I mean, it is what it is. Auburn fans, I'm sorry, you're always excited when you win, but if you're giddy Tuesday or Wednesday about beating Kentucky, that's just not healthy. I'm sorry, it's not healthy, not for Auburn.
I've got a question for Kevin.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
You've lived here a long time. The dynamics in this state.
Most of his life,
to put it mildly, yes. My entire adult life, yes.
The dynamics in this state. What if Kalen DeBoer goes 8-4? What does that look like here?
Oh, we gotta fire DeBoer.
Auburn's 10 wins.
Look up and see how many people are out on ledges, wearing crimson colors.
Yeah,
it won't be good. You know that it'll be that's when a sense of panic, I think, will start to set in.
He gets a third year.
Gosh, they got the wrong guy.
He gets a third year.
I think barring an unnatural disaster, like 4-8, 5-7, losing to Auburn among those games, he's going to get year 3. I would be shocked if he didn't. And I don't see them having a season like that where the bottom drops out and they just lose so many games that they look clueless and unprepared and overmatched. I don't think it will be along those lines. But if they drop those close games, if they lose a game that they've been accustomed to winning, they've almost chalked up in the win column, like the Iron Bowl since 2020, then there's going to be grumbling, and there's going to be wailing and gnashing of teeth and second guessing and all the comparisons to he ain't Nick Saban. Well, there's only one of those. There's only been one, and he ain't coming back. So I don't know. It won't be good, and that's why this year, and that leads to me to throw a question at you guys, Ronnie. Is this the year? Have to is a strong, but does Auburn have to end the Iron Bowl streak this year? Because it has quietly crept. I mean, we're talking now. We're not to the back to the 70s.
We're fearing the thumb.
Yeah,
but it's moving slowly in that direction, despite the close games that Auburn has not been able to hang on and win.
Well, I think that Georgia and Alabama being in Auburn. Look, I think Hugh Freeze is going to get year 4. That being said, if the bottom falls out and it's 5-7 again, there's going to be tremendous pressure. And I think all bets are off at that point. But I don't think they're going to go 5-7, but I do think beating Alabama, especially in Auburn, it would be a huge deal on both sides of the state. And I guess that's kind of what I was leading into. This rivalry has been cyclical, and is the pendulum about to switch?
I think looking ahead to that, I think you got to win this Iron Bowl. I mean, it's going to be Auburn has had a tough time in Bryant-Denny, even when they're really elite. My goodness, I mean, that Cam Newton-led national title team had to come from behind 24. I always like having to repeat that historical fact, Rob, because goats are goats, but the goat has a couple of ugly Iron Bowls he gets to add to the resume, and that doesn't take away from Saban's greatness, that's for sure. I think you got to win this Iron Bowl, and I think that looking ahead, man, is it too early in May to be talking about what we think we're going to see in the Iron Bowl?
Not in this state.
We don't. I mean, reliably talking about it, because we don't really even know who the two starting quarterbacks will be in the Iron Bowl. You think Jackson and Arnold and Ty Simpson, but man, a lot can happen during the season, both performance and injuries. But I just think the X factor I would want to add to you guys' comments about DeBoer, Freeze. Is there a scenario that either of them could get on the hot seat? And now these money brokers and ADs have to think. And I think DeBoer, if let's say he used Ronnie's example, he does go 8-4, which I don't think. I think Alabama's got 9 wins in them, and they've an Alabama fan would say they got 11 wins in them regular season or 12. That fair, so be it. But NIL, there's some decision makers that are going to say, look, we like our guy. We think he has as good a chance to turn the corner if we can avoid the disruption of a coaching change and all the uncertainty of that. If we pour our money into the NIL collective instead of the coach's buyout, isn't that strategically smarter? So I think that NIL X factor to go get talent, we just saw it happen with Ryan Day. I mean, I was bearish on Ryan Day ever winning a title, and even though he lost to Michigan, here we are. So they made that play with $20 million, and some more and more schools the big time programs are going to ask themselves, before we go through firing a coach that we're at least uncertain about, wouldn't it make more sense to go give him a top 5 roster in the country and give it one more year? And so I think that would likely be in the discussion with an 8-4 Kalen DeBoer, and it would likely be in the discussion with Hugh Freeze, who I think is generally liked. You agree, Rob and Ronnie? I think he's liked at Auburn. He's going to quit being liked if he does inexplicable things like the personnel substitutions or tell the defense what he's about to do. And that's why I don't like these packages. We send the second string quarterback in, and we know he's going to run the ball. Yeah, so I'm not a fan of that.
I'm going to throw this one at you, and this is a serious question. If Auburn doesn't stop this bleeding against the two big rivals, Alabama, and loses a 6th in a row, Georgia, if you go back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, Auburn won the Georgia series 6 games or more every one of those decades. And in 2000, it went to 4-6. That's when Rick came there and built the Iron Curtain around Georgia. 2010 to 2019, Auburn was 3-8, having played Georgia twice in 2017. So far in this decade, Auburn's 0-5. Being serious when I say this, does Georgia consider Auburn a rival? Their fan base. And does Alabama, do they look more at the national picture and say, if we lose to Auburn, but we make the playoffs, which they did in 2017, and as frustrating as that is for Auburn fans, was that the windshield wiper that took out the win over number 1 Georgia and 2 weeks later, number 1 Bama? I mean, you got to start asking these questions, because Bama fans, we know a lot of them, they look at the big national picture. And is Auburn just myopically focused on winning the state championship? And where do you go from here? Because Auburn's the 12th winningest program in the history of college football and should do better.
I just will prime the pump and let Kevin and Ronnie jump in. I wonder if we're in the early stages of, and it sounds like heresy to say this, early stages of traditional rivalry games. They still matter. There's in-state or, contiguous state hatred like Ohio and Michigan. They matter, and people will go to the games and they're fired up. But with 12 teams, soon to be 14, maybe 16 team playoff, I wonder if those rivalry games just are more like another big game that you really need to win so that you make the cut on that playoff line. And so, for example, do you think an Ohio State fan is downtrodden, depressed because they lost to Michigan right now?
Yeah.
I think a few, probably the old guard. I think they're just talking about how they found a way and they cleaned the floor with a pretty easy, manageable path in the playoff. So
yeah.
I think you'll see Auburn and Alabama fans, any fans, love the rivalries. History matters, but they mainly they find a way to win it because you want to make the playoff. But if you're sitting there, if you have a year where you get to 9-0 or 10-0 and you're going to play Alabama, you could lose that Iron Bowl, and if it makes you 11-1, how depressed are you? You're in the playoff, you know. So I think that might shift a little bit, Kevin.
That's where we've lost something. This is the ultimate, most vivid illustration of how the playoff, the expansion of the playoff in particular, has watered down the regular season. Because I will guarantee you, I didn't take a poll or anything, but there's not a single Alabama fan that cares that they lost the 2017 Iron Bowl.
No,
you can't gig them with that. You can't throw Jarrett Stidham up in their face because they will say second and 26 mattered a lot more than anything that happened to Jordan Hare that day. Didn't matter how bad Jalen Hurts looked. Didn't matter how, even though that game was a 12-point game at the end, it wasn't, Auburn was the better team that day, just as they were the far better team against Georgia a couple of weeks earlier. You think Georgia fans care? Not one bit. They won the SEC for the first time in a while. They got to the national championship game, came up a whisker short, one stop short maybe. And so the whole dynamic has changed. And like you said, we have a very recent example of that with Ohio State and Michigan.
Yeah.
So those games have lost something. And to me, that's a shame because college football loses something. If the Iron Bowl,
I think the thrust of Rob's question is Auburn keeps losing to arch rivals. Are they going to, but I don't know anybody that thinks a program like Auburn is going to stay down very long.
Well, what does this say? Hey, how about this? I will make this suggestion that Auburn is more likely to beat Alabama this season than Georgia. Mm-hmm. What does that say about where those three programs are, or where Georgia is versus Alabama? And how Alabama has lost some of its luster and not just starting with Kalen DeBoer, but going back earlier.
I think even Georgia, compared to the best teams Kirby has had, Georgia has a few flaws, not many, but I don't think Georgia's invincible like they have been a couple of years.
I disagree with you guys a little bit. I think that the Iron Bowl still matters. I was watching it's been a couple of years ago now, but I was watching an interview with Nick Saban on YouTube, and he was talking about, the success of the season and this and that and the other. And he's like, but if you lose that game at the end of the season, the regular season, it's but, and it still matters to people. I know it still matters to people that I live next to, around here. So I still think those games mean something. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think they mean a lot. And maybe to those of us who are getting older, it means more to us. I'm not sure, but I know college football has changed a lot. But to me, it still means a lot.
And I wouldn't disagree with that, Ronnie. I'm not saying it doesn't mean it. It still is, in the regular season, it's still the most important game on the calendar, no question. But in terms of its historic importance, I remember Pat Dye talking to him. I was just coming out of school and just starting my internship at the Birmingham News in '84, but talking to him, a couple of years later, what that '84 loss did to him, the fourth and dumb, how do you get to Memphis? You go to the 1 yard line in Legion Field and turn left. All the jokes that went along with I waxed the dude.
Yeah.
But that hurt him. He broke out in hives.
Yeah.
In the week or so after that game, it physically, mentally, emotionally hurt him. And one of the most courageous, gutsy, wisest moves Auburn ever made was in the wake of that. If I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, if you and Doug, you certainly would have some remembrance of this. I believe Auburn voted to expand the stadium not long after that 84 loss. So at a low moment in many ways for the program, after winning 2 straight Iron Bowls and, looking Alabama in the eye and not blinking and showing them that they were back, they lose that game to an Alabama team with a losing record, and they lose it in a way they should never have lost it. That's not a team you should have lost to, despite Alabama's talent that they had. But Auburn gave Pat Dye a huge vote of confidence. They still believed that he was the guy with what he'd already done, what they thought he was going to do going forward. And they voted, the board of trustees voted to expand the stadium. And what that meant to him personally after going through the personal anguish of losing that game. I don't know that we're at that point now where it is going to cause great anguish to the head coach, maybe to the fans more so, especially as you mentioned, Ronnie, the older fans. But especially if you're still in the playoff, especially if, the next week on Selection Sunday, you're in the field.
Yeah, Kevin, those 80s, and this would not be pleasant, and I wouldn't expect my good Bama friends to agree necessarily. You got to study each Iron Bowl in its own merits. But Dye, arguably, if you study that 84 and 85 games that got away from him, Dye should have beaten Alabama 8 years in a row.
That's what I was about to say, Doug.
Yeah,
82
absolutely.
through 89, and man, oh man, the vibe that would have, it was already happening in the state, and most people felt like Dye was dominating the in-state rivalry. He was on the field, and by the way, 85 game, all props to Van Tiffen, but ask any Auburn fan, they will go to their grave saying Greg Richardson was tackled in bounds. It shouldn't have even been a field goal attempt, but that happens in games. Bear Bryant would say, you shouldn't have let it come down to one play.
What was the little guy, the 5'7" defensive back for Auburn was in there, and a friend of mine was on the sidelines.
Luther Bivens
out of Thompson and Alabaster. Okay, he shouldn't have been out there. And Greg and Ron Stallworth was on the sidelines. Should have been in there rushing, and Kevin Porter was so close. I was there, but this is a good thing that Auburn people need to start saying is, and I've had Auburn friends tell me, we shouldn't be win at all costs like Alabama. I'm like, hell yeah, you should. You better do everything you can to win. And the overall athletic department at Auburn is really strong now. And I know people that are really involved in backing Auburn now. But you go back to some losses. Kirby's first year at Georgia, arguably one of the most unforgivable losses in the modern era of Auburn football, along with the wrong way in 84, was the 2016 loss in Athens. That was just Gus basically his brain shut down, and John, the third
Georgia didn't score an offensive touchdown the second half or something like that.
How about
Maurice
the 96
Smith
Georgia game?
Yeah, the 96 was another one. Yeah, that's right. When all you do, just the defensive back, just push the guy down, you get a pass interference. And Auburn's put some heartbreak on other schools.
Let me on this.
That was a hard one too. Yeah.
This very question. For me, it's a chicken and the egg problem. So y'all can identify which came first. Am I just getting older? Well, that factually I am. If you're not getting older, you've got a bigger problem.
That's right.
You're not here anymore.
That's right. You're not watching TV anymore.
But I remember, to me, one of the barometers for how serious do we all take the Iron Bowl is the misery index. The lifespan of that for me ran months when Auburn, I felt like they had a chance to win that one, and it was going to feel such pride to pull that win off again. And anytime you beat Alabama, you've done something. But and so the misery would persist, and I'm talking about maybe into my 40s ish, and I'm well past that now. I don't know if the game has changed and what we think of football, and that we're less folks, some of us, not all, are less focused on the intensity of that rivalry and bragging rights around the water cooler at work, and we're more about winning championships. And beating your arch rival helps you get in position to win a national championship. But like we've talked about, it's no longer an absolute requirement to beat your arch rival to get in the playoff picture and have a chance to win it all. So I think we've diluted it a little. Or guys, am I just getting older and I have a whole different perspective about those kind of things?
No, you're right. I mean, but in 2011, Alabama.
Is it the chicken or the egg, Rob?
It's. I mean, here's how I look at it. In 2011,
I know we're packing both stadiums when the Iron Bowl comes around. That hadn't changed, has it?
No. And also,
Nor will it.
2011, LSU and Alabama played a second time. LSU won the regular season, and in 2017, Alabama's won the national championship twice without even winning the SEC. But here's another.
By the way, would that this is interesting. Kevin probably has the answer. Maybe you guys do. 2010, if Auburn loses that Iron Bowl in Tuscaloosa, is Auburn, TCU was undefeated. Does Auburn still jump into the national championship game?
I think they do. If they go on and win the SEC
Wax South
as
Carolina.
they did in dominant fashion over South Carolina and Steve Spurrier, I still believe they would have.
How would Auburn fans have felt that year beating Oregon for the national championship, but with a loss in T-Town?
Ooh,
that's
a really good question.
Wouldn't it be interesting? Because you got
to
Saban's, but you never beat Saban at Saban. Now you can't have it both ways, Alabama fans. Only national championships matter, or is the Iron Bowl real? That would have been interesting.
To find out how much the Iron Bowl matters. You know, if Alabama goes down and gets beaten this year in Jordan-Hare, ask Kalen DeBoer how much it matters.
How many bricks go through windows?
How many
and also it's when they lose, fan bases, you pick the fan base, will say, oh, that game really doesn't matter. You know it does. And I'm just throwing that out there. I think it's because in this millennium, Auburn is 7-18 against Georgia. That series just a few years ago was tied. Actually, Auburn had a 4-5 game lead.
That's right.
And that 96 game, I remember my friend Mark Green at the time, the original blogger with Murphy on Inside the Auburn Tigers, said, that set football back 50 years. How did Auburn lose that game? Mike Bobo, what a pass. But Auburn.
Charles Dorsey, Charles Dorsey, Uli is what we called him. You know, he picks that ball. I mean, the game was over.
Yeah.
I mean, the game was over.
Yes.
If we're focused, and I'm enjoying that we've focused, and I know fans love it, focused heavily on the Iron Bowl dynamics. At what point, anytime soon, will Auburn shift the balance of power? We don't know. And, you talk about doing that against a program like Alabama, as stacked as they are with talent. The easy part is saying it. The hard part is coaches and players doing something about it. But I think something that's interesting to watch, and the old guard, Dye and Stallings, love to talk about this. Hugh Freeze 2 years ago started, Ronnie will back me up on this, heavily committing to getting the best players out of the state of Alabama. And I'm not saying Alabama wasn't recruiting them too, but it was a clear priority. And maybe the lone defection was Ryan Williams, who said that he was possibly going to sign with Auburn until 4th and 31. And maybe just saying that to gig at Auburn. But so when you get in these highly contested Iron Bowls and the guys in the trenches and the players who are going to determine the outcome, if one team has in-state players, does that give you a wee tiny motivational factor, either in preparation or effort in game? Or players, does it really not matter that much? I'd be very nervous to get too far away from having a pretty heavy in-state roster for very long, unless I knew I was getting players that knew how to play tough in the Deep South.
They're less likely to quit on you.
Yeah. I think I was talking to a coach the other day, and he said, Doug, the same thing. He said, when you recruit kids, if you get too many kids on your roster from New York and California and wherever else, and they're not from this part of the country, it doesn't mean
they ever had their nose bloodied.
Yeah, I mean, you bring in kids from Florida and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, it means more to them because just culturally it means more.
Yeah. Now, if it means more and you run a 4.7 40, it won't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But if the talent is roughly equal, but one team, you had kids that grew up knowing what Roll Tide War Eagle really means in late November. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I can remember talking not that long ago to Dabo Sweeney about that. He made that exact same point, Ronnie, that kids in this part of the country, because of the way that they're raised, because of the love for the sport that's passed down from generation to generation, and love for these rivalries and love for your school, that it does mean more. It's not just a cliche that the SEC came up with some years ago to use as a slogan. It is the absolute truth. And if two players are equal, relatively speaking, and no two are exactly alike, but if one comes from Palos Verdes, California, and one comes from Alabaster, Alabama, you're going to lean towards the guy from Alabaster, Alabama, not just because he plays for Thompson and they're really, really good.
Speaking of rivalries,
cultural here, it's not. You go spend time in California. It's not that they don't have good football players. It's just cultural. It matters more here than it does in other places.
It does. And look at these stats. What team in college football has beaten Alabama more than anyone else?
Auburn.
Who?
Auburn.
No, Tennessee.
40
times. But I was going to say they have played 106 times.
I bet in 1989 it might have been Auburn, but not now.
Yeah. And now, if you take a look at it, Auburn and Alabama have played 89 times. So 99, 106, 17 more times. There was that period from 1907 to 1948, the laundry money, the per diem money. And I saw Coach Dye in a documentary about Auburn football. He said there was a period there, 41 years or so, where the industrial, just blue-collar segment of the Alabama state population latched on to Alabama. I remember talking to Phyllis about this from Mulga, rest her soul. We talked one night about 45 minutes off air, and she said, Rob, she goes, I love Tommy Tuberville. She was a sweet lady and was raised Catholic. I really was impressed. She was really cool. She told me something. She said, we were so poor growing up. We had a big old radio out on the front porch, and I think she had 5 brothers and her parents. They all gravitated around there, just like people would gravitate to listen to Buddy Rutledge. He used to have to be wheeled into the press box at Auburn games. He was in a wheelchair. Buddy Rutledge was the play-by-play guy when Tucker Frederickson and Jimmy Seidel were at Auburn in '63. We all know the history, the traditions, and the heroes. And I think that's my kids know the same stuff about Auburn that we're talking about now. And they're 24, 26, 29. Mallory's 36, and she went to Alabama. And believe me, growing up, being around us, she knows a lot about Auburn. But, yeah, that Iron Bowl matters. I just threw that out there. Just wanted to throw that out there. But a win is going to certainly help things. We're going to wrap it up here. We got about 4 minutes, but
Can I throw one
an
quick
awesome
one in, Rob?
discussion, by the way. Today.
I can't wait to watch this year, and I don't know who it's gonna get. Sometimes you got right.
Yep.
But they're all 16 coaches have an opportunity to show what a dumbass they are on a Saturday afternoon this fall. And I had this flashback to 1994 in the swamp. Terry Bowden goes in there, and Spurrier has a mat on because he had lost in '93, you'll recall. And Spurrier, he's one of my top 3 favorite coaches. He was an acquired taste as a head coach. I hated him for a while. But late game, he just didn't have any, like Ronnie was saying about Freeze. Spurrier didn't have it. He was pissed off that his passing game wasn't ideal that day. He had to let Werfel throw one more deep ball. Brian Robinson picks it. All he had to do was run the ball there, punt it if you have to, and I don't think Auburn scores. But, yeah, coaches – of course, it was a dumb play if it didn't work. Sometimes it's a smart play if it works, right?
Ask Ron Zook. He got blamed for that. He's like, Zook will still tell you. He's like, hell, it's not my fault that the quarterback kept throwing interceptions.
Yeah. That was
Two quarterbacks.
And that was one of the biggest days.
Terry Dean and Werfel.
That's right.
Auburn recruiting. Remember how many Florida kids were there at Deerfield Beach? Well, from Dillard High School, and they were all there at that game. But man,
that's probably the most masterful play calling job I've seen from any Auburn offensive guy that Bowden called that game.
Andy Fuller, the tight end out of Huntsville.
Yeah.
What 7 catches, 126 yards. Who saw that coming, man? But God, this is a great man. I will go back and watch this show a couple of times tonight. I do like coaches and break down the tape, but this has been really revealed. This damn Iron Bowl matters, and that Georgia game matters. But you start beating them, and I think those days are coming for Auburn. I think Auburn. This roster.
The gap is closed.
Yeah.
We're going to find out how much it's been closed.
I do. I mean, and it's – hey, Brendan, I wanted to get Brendan to say something about this channel too. There's so much great content on here. And always give credit, Kevin, where it is, where we've run out of time. But Scarbo knows, Duke Scoops, this show, Sidelines, Buddy Martin Show. There's so many great shows on here. Lowdown with Lauren Meadows. The bottom line is it matters a hell of a lot. And I sense no apathy among this foursome and everybody watching. This is not for the faint-hearted, man, but great, awesome show, guys. Thanks everybody for watching. All right, that's it. Good night, John Boy.
See you, Stud.
Brendan will take us out with the